And getting us kicked off here is James Stergios. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's the executive director of the Boston-based think tank Pioneer Institute. Pioneer Institute has produced the most analytic work on the Common Core in the country, with multiple peer-reviewed published reports on their relative quality, cost, and legality. In doing this work, they have taken no funding from interested parties, and they have commissioned the reports from the most highly qualified scholars and experts in the country. Jim will address the costs, legality, how truly federal CC is, and the quality. Please help me welcome James Stergios. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here this evening. First and foremost, thank you to Mary and to her team. Fantastic team. It's great to be with you. I came from Boston. I haven't smelled flowers for at least 4 months. I was glad to get off that plane and smell something alive. So thank you. That's why we read a lot of books up there, you know. As Trey was saying, I'm Jim Stergios, Executive Director of Pioneer Institute. I say a couple things about Boston, about Massachusetts, about the work that we do. We're not just all about Common Core. For 25 years, we have focused primarily on education reform in Massachusetts. If you go back 20 years, 22 years ago, before the national assessments, the nation's report card was really applied at the state level, so we could actually understand which states were doing well and which ones weren't doing well, Massachusetts was about 12th in the country, all right? We are now #1 in the country in every subject tested, in every grade tested by that national assessment. We are also in the top 6 countries in math and science according to 2 international assessments. So my point in saying that is not to brag, but is to make one very clear point to every one of you, and that is states can do this work. And the counterposition to that is, where the federal government has been involved with education policy, I think I would be hard-pressed to find a single instance where they have had a significant impact in improving student achievement. So that's just a baseline just to start you off. I'm going to make 4 very specific claims tonight. This is an information session. I want to make very clear claims to you. The first one is Common Core, notwithstanding all that you'll hear from folks who are proponents of Common Core, was not state-led, okay? The second contention that I'm going to make is that it does not jibe with our Federalist traditions, and I'll explain why that is, and why that's just it's more than just saying it's not aligned with our Constitution. It's actually a legal issue, a federal statutory issue. Third claim I'm going to make is that there are lots and lots of unfunded mandates involved with Common Core. And finally, I'm going to set up the experts who really know a lot about the quality of Common Core, which is mediocre, so they can actually get into greater depth. That's my job here tonight, okay? So first and foremost, let's talk about what state-led means. If you hear folks who are proponents of Common Core, they will say the NJA was involved, the National Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers was involved, that's the group of commissioners at the state level, so therefore it was a state-led effort. Let me explain to you what a real state-led effort looks like. Most states got involved at this level, and I'll just give the example from Massachusetts, where in Massachusetts, as we drafted standards, we involved experts from higher ed, scholars, business leaders, teachers, and parents. We articulated a draft set of standards. We held public hearings, put them out for public comment, went back and revised those on the basis of the comments that we got, put out to the public comments that were received so all of the public could see it, and then went through that whole process all over again. For 3+ years, we had newspaper articles, front page stories on of the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, the Worcester Telegram Gazette, across the state talking about math, about English literature, about what history are we going to teach our kids. I would make a subclaim here. There's nothing more important to do in public than to talk about what we want to teach our kids. There's nothing more sacred for us, right? That's a state-led process. You notice I said public, 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 public a lot there. That wasn't on purpose. It just comes out naturally. Compare that to Common Core. Common Core was developed in a way that was to actually limit the amount of public input. There was a website that across the country had several thousand pieces of information that was given to them. It was never put out to the public what was actually received. There were no public hearings. It is true to say that, in fact, the entire process was created to limit public input. And I would say that anybody who thinks that that's a state-led process simply because there may have been one or two teachers from Louisiana. I was in Indiana recently, said, yeah, we had 2 teachers who participated in that. And I said, wow, in Massachusetts we had hundreds. We had hundreds of parents. That's different. That's very different. And anybody who thinks that's a state-led process, that's a state-led public process, does not trust, it does not value a public process, which is the cornerstone of our democracy. Second claim I'm going to make is, look, set aside the Constitution for a second. I'm not saying the Constitution's not important, okay? Is this legal? Pioneer Institute commissions reports from experts. I'm not the expert. I'm the translator for you here today, all right? Because we couldn't get all the experts here, and frankly, you might not understand the language they speak to you. We hired the 2 top lawyers for the United States Department of Education. The General Counsel, the Deputy General Counsel of the United States Department of Education, to explore, not the Constitution, but the statutes that guide and restrict the activity of the Federal Department of Education. These are not fly-by-night lawyers. And what they said was the General Education Provisions Act of 1970, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which you've heard about recently as No Child Left Behind, and the Department of Education Organization Act of 1979, which established the department for the first time in America's history. All 3 of those statutes contain language that says this. They, quote unquote, ban federal departments and agencies from directing, supervising, or controlling elementary and secondary school curriculum, programs of instruction, and instructional materials. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson signed one of those laws. Jimmy Carter signed another of those laws. Those are fellows I would argue with. You had a pretty expansive view of the federal power. But somehow we hear from our friends on the conservative side, people like Jeb Bush, who say, don't worry, Common Core is not trespassing on those laws. It's not breaking those laws that are very clear in putting a firewall between the federal government and curriculum and instructional practice in the classroom. I don't need to talk to you about the race to the top, which provided money to states to adopt. There was a second race to the top, which is actually for districts. It was really aiming to do an end run around states so that states couldn't block Common Core. Common Core was one of the requirements there. No Child Left Behind had a waiver for those states that also adopted Common Core in the national tests. You know, secretaries of education give out waivers all the time, but they always do it within the confines of what is a federal statute, what is legal. That is not the case here. The one that stands out for me the most, yes, the federal department set up a technical review panel for the national tests. Not that they're controlling the tests, folks, no. But the one that stands out for me more than anything else is the fact that, as you know, there are 2 national consortia, testing consortia. PARC is the one that applies to Louisiana. $350 million given out by the federal government to these 2 consortia. To get that money, they had to apply for it, and they actually wrote down what they're going to do. Their applications state clearly they will develop curricular materials and instructional practice guides. I would say that we ignore questions of the rule of law at our peril. We are a society of law, not of people. Third claim, Common Core proponents like to say, look, we're going to have transformation in the classroom, but it won't cost you really much at all. So Common Core is being pushed from late 2009, 10, 2011. My organization looks at it and says, wow, you know, no one even knows how much it's going to cost. Think about that. A policy that is proposed and promulgated and incentivized by the federal government, and there's no cost estimates of what it'll mean for states and localities. So we went and hired one of the best assessment gurus in the country to say, what will assessments cost in terms of professional development, the technology required, textbooks, all the rest. What he said was at least $16 billion. Now, states and localities provide 90% of education funding. They will provide 90% of this funding as well. right? There's no magic pot at the end of the rainbow that's somehow going to save states and localities from having to spend this money. And in fact, if you look at Florida, their estimates are $400 million above for technology alone what we had in our report because we were working from empirical evidence from the states themselves. So a real number, I would say these days, looking at California's experience and the experience in other states, is probably more like $25 billion. Now, you might say, our kids are worth every penny we spend. But I would say to you, if we spend $25 billion on this, we will not spend it on that. And we are really distracting ourselves from the real work at hand. I would further say that the real work at hand has much more to do with what our kids are getting taught, and that's the quality of the Common Core, which I would assert is of a mediocre quality. Sandy Stotsky and Jim Milgram will speak to that in depth, as will Terrence Moore, so I'm not going to get into much here. I'm going to make a couple of very brief comments. First, I'm going to quote from Sandy so she doesn't have to say it. She looked at the English language arts standards, and she looked at the English language arts standards in countries around the world that are English-speaking countries. And she wrote, Common Core standards for English language arts are neither research-based nor internationally benchmarked, a claim that Common Core proponents had made for a long time. They were internationally benchmarked. Never saw who they're benchmarked against. And finally, after we criticized them, they said, well, we didn't mean internationally benchmarked, we meant informed, meaning maybe we looked at them. She further wrote, to judge from my own research on the language and literature requirements for a high school diploma, Common Core's ELA standards fall far below what other English-speaking nations or regions require of college-intending high school graduates. So what is supposed to get us to the level of being internationally competitive falls far behind. Common Core proponents also like to say how they copied states that were doing well and had shown the most improvement. Massachusetts is showing a lot of improvement for a long time. They did not look at what we were doing. What we did is we focused on literature and poetry. And the reason why we focused on literature and poetry, especially in grades K through 8, is that kids learn meaning by reading between the lines. And there's connectivity, there is nuance, there is irony and sarcasm and all the rest in meaning when it's literature and poetry. That's not in a textbook. A textbook is an informational text from which you vacuum out information. You're not learning any of those things, and meaning is premised on so many of those elements. So they didn't copy us at all. And in fact, if you look at Massachusetts over the last couple of years, since we adopted Common Core 2, yep, we took the money too, folks. Our 3rd and 4th grade reading scores on our state test, which is considered one of the best in the country, have fallen. Surprise, surprise. Now, is that a causal link? As a researcher, I cannot say it is. The timing is interesting. I would also note it's not just the MCAS, our state test, but the national assessment has shown Massachusetts for the past few years is flatlined. We were once one of the fastest improving states, if not the fastest improving state. That troubles me. On the math side, Jim is here. He'll talk about a lot of what's there. I would underscore one of the things he's going to talk about is even one of the lead writers of Common Core, Jason Zimba, admitted that basically Common Core college readiness, its definition of college readiness, means that kids will be ready for a non-selective community college or a non-selective state college, and that's it. And what I would add to the quality conversation is this. You will hear from state proponents of Common Core, don't worry, we heard the same thing. Adopt Common Core, and you, Massachusetts, can add in all that beautiful literature you like. And you can add in higher level math if you'd like. Folks, do not be bamboozled by this. And the reason I say that is this, and that's not a technical term, bamboozle doesn't really fit that. It's that Common Core tests will test only what's part of Common Core. Your state add-ons do not matter. You're allowed 15% you can add on, but the 85% has to be verbatim. But the tests will not test what you add. So what that means is that over time, because what is tested is usually what is taught, that's where the focus goes, you will lose all the rest. Finally, one last point, and that is talking a little bit about school choice, a place where you guys in Louisiana have played hard. I would urge anyone who thinks or who comes to you and says, you know, Common Core is really good for school choice, remember this. America does school choice differently from Europe. In America, we fund parents. Parents receive a voucher or a tax credit, and they go to the institution of their choice. Generally speaking, that does not entail a state test which drives curriculum in a certain pattern. And in fact, in the United States, we generally see private institutions use norm reference tests, which are curriculum neutral. With Common Core in Louisiana, in Ohio, in Indiana, as part of voucher programs, there is the requirement that those schools will administer Common Core aligned tests. Common Core aligned tests are not like norm reference tests. They are not curriculum neutral. They are meant to drive curricula and curricular choices. That's what Massachusetts state test does as well. So I would say to you, it's not good on really any of those points that I've made, whether is it state-led? No, it's not. Will it cost a lot of money? Yes, it will. Is it legal? Frankly, there are huge questions about it. Is the quality high? No. And finally, is it good for school choice? No. And I would say that Louisiana can do a lot better, and we'd be pleased to work with anyone here to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim.